My name is Jan Jorrit Hasselaar, and I'm working as a coordinator for the Amsterdam Center for Religion and Sustainable Development of the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. The background of this session is last Amsterdam International Water Week and the VU University Water Symposium 2009, with as topic toward water sensitive cities, with a focus on the cities of Cape Town, Jakarta, and Amsterdam. And we talked there about the multi-dimensional challenge to address issues related to water and climate change. In order to address these very complicated issues, it's important to build partnerships between the natural science, business, politics, and religion, which is also indicated in Sustainable Development Goals 17. And as a first step forward, we would like to present two case studies exploring the interaction between first religion and business, and then religion and government, as a way to increase understanding and increase the shared challenges, and to explore whether we can work together on it from several disciplines. So I would like to invite now Professor Zainal Abidin Bagir from the Universitas Gadjah Mada and Professor Frans Wijs of the Radboud University in Nijmegen to take us to the first case study.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jan Jorrit, for this opportunity. So I will first give a background. This is research that I and Frans just started. Actually, we wanted to start the research mid this year, but because of the pandemics, then we postponed it until next year. This is also part of the project that we are doing under the Netherlands-Indonesia Netherlands-Indonesia Consortium for Christian-Muslim relations, and ICMCR. So we have a working group of religion and ecology, and this is also one of the projects under that. So the idea of the discourse of religion and ecology, or religion and environment, it had started actually soon after the emergence of the awareness of environmental crisis in the 1960s. If you study religion and ecology discourse, then in 1960s, there's the famous article by Lynn White Jr., for example, which speaks about the role of Christianity in the environmental crisis. And then there's also, among Muslims, there was Syed Hussein Nasr, who also wrote in 1967 about the religion, environmental crisis as a moral, spiritual crisis. So this idea is not new, and it has been a global idea relating religion and environment. Well, when we come to Indonesia, there are two facts which makes this discourse becomes really natural. First, Indonesia is the site of one of the worst environmental problems in Indonesia on many issues in terms of carbon emission and others. many things. But at the same time, Indonesia is also, if you look at many indexes, it is considered as one of the most religious country. Well, using certain criteria. Next slide, please. And so the research project, it's the big title is the Human Nature project, using human and nature scale. This is a scale which was developed actually for the first time in Nijmegen, by researchers in Radboud University, and it's still active until now, the center. And then there was research in some European countries, and then Canada, Vietnam, and the one in Indonesia that we'll be doing, that's the next step. So we do it independently. It's not like one big global research project, but we were interested because when we found it, it seems like it would help us to understand many things. So human and nature scale, it measures people's ideas or worldviews. And using scale in social science, that means you open the possibility of comparing across countries, across cultural, religious, etc. So next slide, please. And the can you go to next slide, please? Yeah. So the typology, which is used by so probably previous slide, the typology which was used by in human nature scale, the original typology has this four: mastery over nature, stewardship of nature, partnership with nature, and participation in nature. So this is the typology which was found and used in some of the European countries and Canada, and also Vietnam. When the research in Vietnam took place, they made some adjustments, but they still came up with this four typology. When we do our pilot research in Indonesia a few months ago, before the pandemics, actually, we came up with two other types. That is independence with nature and nature as threat, meaning that from this preliminary research, actually there are new types which we found which are not exhausted by the existing typology. So we will be using this, and I think it will still be interesting. And the fact that in the context of Indonesia, when we contextualize it by considering that Indonesia is a religious country. I mean, religion play important roles here, unlike in the other places in which this research was done before, in Europe and Canada and others. So with some of this contextualization, then we found this. The next slide, please. The next slide is the last one. So when what we have done is actually a pilot project, pilot research. We have done this in a few places. We will do the whole, I mean, the full-fledged research in 10 sites in Indonesia, several provinces next year. But one important thing when we speak about religion as one important component in this research is that we actually we are aware that religion is not limited to teachings or traditions, worldviews, but religion also includes practices, rituals, institutions, leaders, authorities, which in Indonesia actually now all this, the institutions, the authorities, they are already in one way or another involved in environmental works. And then we also will not limit religion to the established or recognized religion, but we will include local religions, or sometimes it's also called indigenous religions. So we use a wider category. And then from this research, what we expect is that we have better knowledge about how religion influences worldviews and people's views about environment, and in turn their action. And we think that this will be important, as has been shown by other research, when we think about implementing a certain policy related to environment in Indonesia. So stay tuned, and hopefully next year we can speak more about this. Thank you.
Next slide. Okay, so after mapping the various worldviews that underlie our behavior towards nature, the next question is, of course, how policymakers, politicians, and government can deal with world views. And I have four statements for discussion, and I will explain them briefly. And those statements are, in fact, based on previous research that Zainal and I have been co-supervising, mainly research in Bandung. So we have some statements that hopefully help us to answer the question how policymakers and politicians can deal with religious worldview. So four statements for discussion, and I will explain them briefly. My first statement is the Indonesian government has various projects to include faith-based organizations in enhancing eco-friendly behaviors, but citizens tend to be skeptic about government projects. We noted in previous research that the term project is experienced quite ambiguous. For example, in Bandung, we saw some pesantren, so Islamic boarding schools, who call themselves eco-pesantren, but not much is going on. On the other hand, there are pesantren who really are engaged in eco-friendly practices, but they don't call themselves eco-pesantren because they are skeptic about government, and they don't want to be associated with the government. So, in fact, we don't need to take or to stimulate the government to take worldviews into account, because the government does that already. There are huge projects on eco mosques, eco-pesantren, but people are skeptic about it. For example, there was a huge project on eco mosques launched in 2017. 1,000 built 1,000 mosques. But very often those projects are so big that they are in fact not realizable. And interestingly enough, in the press statement by the government, they explicitly acknowledge that religious leaders are much more effective than religious leaders. So in this statement, they say that the project will require Muslim religious leaders to cooperate with the private sector, the health and planning ministries, universities, and religious groups. So the government itself says most Muslims in Indonesia listen more to religious leaders than to the government. And that is an interesting observation. So my first statement is that if we want to include the faith-based organizations, how can we overcome this skepticism towards the government? And of course, this has to do with mismanagement. Sometimes the project is so big that they are not realizable. There is mismanagement. Sometimes it has to do with money making and so on. So a huge skepticism. So how can we overcome this skepticism so that there will be a real collaboration between businesses, universities, government, and faith-based organizations? My second statement, policymakers tend to see religion in reified ways. They need to take into account the huge variety within religions. So if you look at the statements by the governments, they tend to speak about religion in a very broad, very general way. But if you look in detail, as most of you will know, there is quite some difference between Nahdlatul Ulama, Muhammadiyah, Praxis. So there is a huge diversity between various faith-based organizations, but also within. There is a huge variety within Muhammadiyah, there is a huge variety within NU, and of course that has very often to do with local conditions. So if policymakers want to make the religious responses to environment issues more effective, they need to take into account the huge variety within the religions themselves. The more concrete a message is, the more effective. So don't speak about a religion in a very general way, but make it very specific to specific religious groups, and look at the worldview that underlies that very specific group. Next slide, please. Next slide, Jan-Jorrit. Third, policymakers must overcome the separation between the spiritual and the material world and the gap between theory and practice. That is also an interesting finding. Sometimes if Indonesian people speak about the West, they say that the West is secularized. But we found that there is quite some secularization in Indonesia as well. We spoke religious leaders who said, well, you know, waste and water management, that is not our business. That is the business of the government. We only deal with the spiritual world, or we deal with the hereafter world. So there is quite some compartmentalization between the spiritual and the material world. But moreover, there is also a gap between theory and practice. For example, we find eco-pesantren in Sidogiri and Pasuruan, who take into account eco-friendly practices. For example, they recycle water, but at the same time, they produce mineral water, santri, air mineral santri, or air mineral al Yassini, but they distribute it in plastic bottles. Whereas NU issued a fatwa against the use of plastic. So there is quite some ambiguity between, on the one hand, the teaching. You have a fatwa, we want to reduce the use of plastic. On the other hand, you have pesantra, who for income generating projects, quite understandable, because they want to make money, that is quite understandable, but they distribute it in plastic bottles. So there is quite some ambiguity here. Four, policymakers must take into account the religious worldviews outside the religious institutions, the de-institutionalized or lived religion. As Zainal said already, there is quite some religious worldviews outside the faith-based organizations like NU, Muhammadiyah, or whatever. And you find them, for example, at pilgrimage places where there is a lived religion dealing with water. But we also found it among artists, activists, who are not looking at it from NU or Muhammadiyah view, but really draw on religious worldviews to make their message relevant. For example, in Bandung, we found a very interesting artist, Tisna Sanjaya, who uses quite some religious images and religious narratives in his arts to motivate people to eco-friendly behavior. So these are my 4 statements for discussion, and I give the floor back to Jan-Jorrit.
Thank you very much, Professor Zainal and Professor Thijssen. We are going now to a response from business, also about human and nature. It's a response from Erik van Ekelen, who's a lead engineer environmental at Van Oort and a program manager of EcoShape. He's not with us in the now, but he has sent us a video. So here is his response.
Many thanks for having me here and allowing me to participate in this discussion on the transition to conquer and to get our lands, the land that we are in our Delta works, the work that we carried out after the final fault in 1953, that caused a lot of damage in our southwestern Delta. We have seen that we have closed off some parts of the estuary to safeguard our hinterland. But in our final works, we actually built a storm surge barrier instead of a real dam at the eastern Scheldt. The sensitivity of the ecosystem is known, and the potential impact to that system by hydraulic engineering works has been growing ever since. Nowadays, it's mandatory to take out environmental impact analysis and to conduct, for instance, nature compensation works when hydraulic engineering works require works that this is not sort of think ourselves as better and we sort of as a bookkeepers control the amount of nature that we have. We are really making the final step in the transition towards really partnering with nature with the recent concepts of building with nature. As an example project, the Sand Motor is really aimed at both creating additional spaces for natural developments in a way that is nowhere occurring along the Dutch coast by placing an enormous amount of sand over there so that nourishments don't have to take place as regularly on some other parks. But on the other hand, it makes use of the natural forces to spread this sand along a larger part of the coast and keep the area behind it safeguarded. So it really shows this partnering and the creation of multi-benefits by conducting hydraulic engineering works in this manner, not so much against nature, but rather working with nature. When turning to Indonesia, we sort of have seen the same kind of development. And for that, I like to give you the example of the coast, the region of Demak along the north coast of Java. We're conducting a building with nature pilot over there. The region is faced with a large erosion of this muddy coast due to the decline of the mangrove belt. The initial response was like normal hydraulic engineering approach to build big dams or to create other hard structures to counter the erosion. Instead, the wave bounced back on these hard structures and caused an enormous erosion in front of the structure in which the complete construction has collapsed. Instead of going for that hard solution, now try to restore the mangrove belt. So we're stewarding nature to do what we like. And we do that by mimicking natural system. And we mimicking the mangrove roots that take out the energy of the water, but still take in the water and its sediments. So that sedimentation can take place and conditions are created so that mangroves can regrow. The final step in making this transition, however, comes when we what we are conducting in order to maintain this mangrove belt and to work on that. We have changed agriculture practices in the area and we've discussed that to improve the yields of the agricultural environment, but on the other hand, create the opportunities for the villages to maintain the mangrove belt as a part of their daily works. So we really have seen one of the key findings there that we've also seen and captured in this book, of which I'm one of the editors. When we are building with nature, we are truly partnering with nature, and we use a system as a starting point. It allows for hydraulic engineering works that are more dynamic, that are multifunctional, that are innovative, and always context specific, and in that way create multiple value. The world is calling with the various crises that we are facing, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, is really calling for these type of solutions. And it's really ready to take hydraulic engineering on in this type of world. I hope you have a good further discussion on the topic of this transition towards water sensitive. Many thanks for having me again.
Well, thank you very much, Erik van Ekelen at Van Noord. after the case study of Professor van Rijssen and Professor Seinel, business responsible for is arguing that ideas about the image of human nature are not just abstract ideas, but that they really matter when it comes to today's issues like climate change or the erosion of coasts. Zainal and Professor Franz are adding also other images of religion to the table, for example, the role of F.B. Joos. Before we go to a plenary about these topics, I first want to present the second case study as well due to the time. So I want now to invite my colleague van Lood from Water Amsterdam to present her case study.
Thank you, Jan-Jorit, and hello to everyone. I'm Marike from World WaterNet, and we are, WaterNet is the public water company in and around Amsterdam, and we are supporting a peer-to-peer knowledge exchange to water authorities and utilities globally. And we had a really nice project in Bekasi, just east of Jakarta, on sanitation. And why is sanitation such an interesting topic? At the moment, wastewater is not treated well in Bekasi. Only 4% is in the end safely managed. And this is a major environmental and health issue, which is only becoming bigger. And the citizens are really necessary to solve this and to improve this. So we will present you briefly what we did. It's quite technical. But in the end, we would like to turn the discussion to religion as a stakeholder. And Jan-Jorit, because we have a really nice video from our colleague of the head of the wastewater treatment technical unit in Bekasi, could you please show that right now? It's 2 minutes. Maybe Jan-Jorit, can you, if you do the sound, if you leave it out, then I can talk. Yeah, thanks, because it's a bit difficult to understand, but the screenshots are still really nice. So we did technical performance improvement of the wastewater treatment plant, which you see pictures here. And we really helped with solving demand-driven problems of the plant. But at the same time, we also helped improving the collection, so the administration. And we also did this online in the last year since COVID hit. And that worked very well. So we trained the people, and they also have a train-the-trainer program now. And secondly, we helped them with a roadmap to improve the situation with wastewater in the next 4 years. And this we did together with other international organizations, being, for example, UNICEF, USAID, the World Bank. And this was, by the way, an Asian Development Bank funded water operator partnership. And it was all possible because of the extremely dedicated staff of the IPLT and the wastewater technical unit. So we cooperated for 3 years with very concrete and tangible results. And the roadmap is now finalized. Could you go to the next slide, Jan-Jorit? And now it's really a matter of implementation. These are just pictures of the team that received their certificates after all the training we did. if we go to the next slide, which indicates just why such a water operator partnership and peer-to-peer knowledge exchange is such a success. It's really cheap, I have to say. It's really joint fact-finding. It's really giving more confidence to the staff itself, and it is about being flexible. So after the severe floods that occurred in Bekasi, we were able to help get the plant back up and running, for example. So let me go to the last slide with some questions for the discussions, because we were able to technically train the staff of the wastewater technical unit, but there's so much more needed to ensure that sanitation gets sufficient attention. One thing that we were able to do when we were there is to also talk to the political level, so to the mayor, for example, and to really ensure political commitment. But how to involve stakeholders is really an issue. There is a socialisatie process, so there's an entire team trying to raise awareness among citizens to really empty their septic tanks, because that's where we're talking about. But how to convey the bigger picture, how to also take into account religion as a possible stakeholder, and could religious communities play a role in raising more awareness for improving the situation? These kind of questions in our technically focused water operator partnership, we were able to only discuss them a bit in the evenings. They were not part of the last 3 years, but we would love to work on these issues in the next years and to continue supporting the great team in Bekasi with this. So for this conference, any input from you or any connections with your activities would be very much welcome. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marieke, for presenting the first part of the second case study. And also here, like in the first case study, I hear the question how to involve religious actors, faith-based organizations in issues of water and sanitation. Before we go to that conversation, I would like to invite our last presenter, wait a minute, our colleague Inke Prima-Dirigiani. Inke, may I give you the floor?
Okay, thank you very much, Jan-Jorit. Good afternoon and good morning to all the participants. My name is Inke Prima-Dirigiani and I work for the Regional Development Planning Board, Jakarta Capital City Government. So in response to the presentation from WaterNet, both Bekasi and Jakarta, we face the same wastewater management issues. Wastewater is usually being discharged directly to the water body or to the river without treatment, and that will have a negative impact for the water quality of the river. So it is important to treat the wastewater so that the water body becomes clean, then it can be used as a source for clean water supply. And part of the religious activities also produce wastewater. As we know that Indonesia has the largest Muslim population in the world, and that water is very important, not only as a source for living, but also as a source for purifying ourselves before we do our prayer activity. We do ablution 5 times a day, and for its rituals requires around 3 to 5 liters of water. And the used ablution water will be discharged as gray water. And as Muslim, we also taught to respect and care for our environment. Thus, we have to do our part in keeping our water bodies clean by treating the water we use in our religious activities. So this is our project proposal for the Dutch Training and Exposure Program, or DUTEP Water Challenge Competition. The project took place in the Fathahillah Mosque in Jakarta City Hall. The idea was to set up a pilot project in a government mosque so that it can be an example and also replicated by other type of mosques. So every day in Fathahillah Mosque, there are around, sorry, can you please go back to the first, yeah.
This one.
One more slide before. Yeah. So every day there are around 2,700 liters of water used for the ablution activity. Sorry, and you're it?
Yeah.
The first slide. Okay. Yeah, so there are around 2,700 liters of ablution water. And on the other hand, there are other activities that requires water. For example, cleaning the moss, watering the plants, and also flushing the toilets. And all those activities requires around 1,300 liters. So on the other hand, there are water that just wastes away. And on the other hand, there are activities that requires water. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah, if you look at the bigger picture in DKI Jakarta, there are more than 3,000 mosques and 3,000 musola. And everyday water used for ablution activity is around 17 million liters of water, which is equal to 897 gallons of water, or equal for watering the plants for area of 8.5 million meters square, or equal to 1,195 football fields. So we can imagine how much water actually can be reused for other activities. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So that's why we came out with the idea of recycling the gray water from the ablution activity. For this project, we also consult with the Majelis Ulama Indonesia, or Indonesian Ulama Council, and they also discuss about two approach in implementing this ECOMOS. The first one is through the spiritual thing by the religious leader. And the second one is by implementing the technology through the e-commerce like this. So this is the schematic design for recycling the ablution water. The elements are the collection pipe, the biofilter tank, the modular tank, the pump, the torrent, and the distribution pipes. And in the next video, you can see how the system is working. So this is the ablution activity on Friday. As we can see that the tap water is open during the ablution activity, and the water is just discharged to the drainage channel. So first, the ablution water is being collected at the collection pipe and then transferred to the biofilter tank, which consists of biofiber, sand, and gravel. And the filtered water then transferred to the modular tank, some of the water being infiltrated to the ground and some of the water being pumped up to the torrent and used for watering the plants, flushing the toilet, and also cleaning the moss. Yeah. Okay, so yes, religious activities and environmental sustainability can be worked together in balance. There are lots of opportunities for innovation in technology, but the most important thing is communication. The government, the religious leader, the scientists, academics, the publics, and all stakeholders have to sit together on the same table and talk so that we will know the do's and don'ts from each perspective. We hope that by doing a good communication, religious activities, and environmental sustainability can be worked together in harmony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imke, for your beautiful presentation about the Eco Mosque. We have still 10 minutes to follow up your suggestion to have a good communication, a good conversation with one another, and to sit on the table. Well, this might be one of the first sessions held on religion and business, religion and government when it comes to water issues. I see a question from Inaya in the chat. Inaya, can you also ask this question just via the Zoom meeting?
Okay, thank you to the speakers. It was a very interesting session. My question, I'll read out my question now. It's for Pak Zainal and all speakers. There are hundreds of religions and convictions in the archipelago with diverse doctrines regarding human nature. How far along or regarding various and how are they being supported either by the state, by corporates, or by civil society organizations? Thank you.
Can you, in one sentence, repeat your question because it was hard to understand here in Amsterdam, at least?
There are diverse sets of doctrines in religions and convictions in the archipelago, with differing views regarding the relationship between humans and nature. What is the state of art regarding these studies, and how are they being supported?
Thank you very much. May I ask Faisal to respond to this question?
Yeah, okay. Well, the actually, if we speak about research about yeah, the involvement of religious communities, I think it just started. So I may also say that much of the research on religion and environment before, it was focused mostly on normative issues, like what are the teachings of one particular religion say about environment, for example. But increasingly, and this is, I think, what we need now, we need more empirical research. Because like Franz said, I mean, when we speak about religion, religion is not simply scripture or religious leader or Majelis Ulama Indonesia, but religions also means people. So one way to call it is lived religion. I think that is the kind of research that we need to do now. How much support for this? Well, the government has involved religious communities, leaders, organization, but mostly they do with big organizations like Muhammadiyah, NU, Nahdlatul Ulama, and others, and they have done it for a long time. The Eco Pesantren is one example of that. And as Franz said, well, I don't exactly remember. I think it's probably more than 10 years ago, this project on Eco Pesantren started. But I think, I mean, as government project, I would say now we don't see much trace of it. But as far as pesantren is concerned, I mean, those who do it on their own, that is based on their own awareness, these are more sustainable. I may also give another example. We are now, I mean, at ICRS is working with the BRG, Badan Restorasi Gambut, the Pitland Restoration Agency in Indonesia, and they are reaching out to many sectors of societies, including religions. They reach out to many churches, and then again, especially Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama, to spread out this message about pitland restoration. But now we're doing with them to train religious counselors or penyuluh agama. We have more than 10,000 penyuluh agama. These are government employees paid by the government for specific purpose. Well, the definition of the religious counselor is that they are expected to convey development messages in religious language. So this formulation, I think it comes from, well, a long time ago. But in any case, I mean, they are on the ground. They speak with people. They meet the religious people on the ground, and we are training them about this. So I think it's starting more and more. And related, there's another question from Yus about the indigenous religion. I think there has not been much attention paid to indigenous religion because of the reason which I mentioned earlier. When it comes to big projects involving religious communities, many people, I mean, including the government, they are more interested in big organizations like Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, and then they go to Majelis Ulama because of numbers. I mean, these are big numbers. The impact is expected to be more significant. Well, the indigenous religion, we know they are small in number, but actually and also they have less recognition compared to the other religions. But I agree. You mentioned use that yeah, they have worldviews which many considered as environment friendly, although I'm not going to generalize that, not to romanticize.
Thank you very much.
That.
Thank you.
But yeah, okay.
A last question, please, in relation to the question of WaterNet and Professor Wijse, how to include religion stakeholders, religious FBOs, faith-based organizations, into very concrete actions on wastewater and so on. Is there someone who wants to make a remark about that or pose a question here? Please feel free. How to engage religious actors in this kind of issues?
Well, maybe in relation to my last, Corrie.
No, please go.
Please, Corrie, please, Corrie.
Okay, then what I want to say is that it all comes to identifying certain religious leaders who have the theological concepts of being engaged with things like justice and development and etc. So it much depends also on theological reflections. And then religion is very diverse, but religious leaders who have already the vision or the theological concept of what it is to be a believer or to be a ummah or a church, you have to identify those leaders and engage them and see where the titik temu, where the connecting point is.
Yeah, maybe in relation to that, my last question was about ablution water. As Inke said, there is more ablution water used than we use for other purposes. So a very sensible question is, why is the recycled ablution water not used for ablution? And here you see that some religious leaders say, okay, that's fine. We can reuse, but some are very reluctant because they say, well, this is not pure. So this is indeed a theological issue, and you really have to find those religious leaders who are really broader in their vision and say, well, okay, after going through a purification process, ablution water can be reused because there is much more ablution water than we use for other purposes.
Thank you very much, Professor Wijse. It's 11 o'clock, so we have to close this session. To end with the saying of Inke Primadriani, that what is required is a good conversation and that we are together on the same table. This was the first time such a table was set. So please feel free to contact me if you have further questions or remarks, if you want to contribute to the community of Praxis we are developing with the cities of Cape Town, Jakarta, and Amsterdam. So please be free to contact us with every question or remark you do have. I want to thank the participants and the presentators of this session for the contribution, and I hope you will enjoy more sessions of winter. Thank you very much for now, and see you in the future, we hope.